Well, I hope you guys are ready to party like it's 1999 because this is your last flipped lesson. We're going to be starting off with the election of 1988. You have a series of Democratic candidates that are going to be fighting for the nomination. Jesse Jackson is going to be running with the idea of a rainbow coalition. Minorities that are going to be running the government in a more ethnic, diverse grouping. But the one that's going to win is Michael Dukakis, who's going to be going up against the incumbent vice president, George H.W. Bush, for the Republican Party. He's many times referred to as 41 or as H.W. Bush or as Bush Sr., 41 because he's the 41st president. I very lovingly refer to him as Papa Bush. He is going to be campaigning for a kinder, gentler America. And with his domestic policy, he's going to have quite a bit of that. Excuse me. He is going to be passing the Americans with Disabilities Act, which made illegal to discriminate against anyone with any mental or physical disabilities. When he was campaigning, the other thing that he said was, "Read my lips. No new taxes." However, once he got in office, he realized that he couldn't do this. And the reason for that was because the country was having absolutely crippling deficit from Reagan's administration, and he needed to raise $133 billion in new taxes to be able to combat that. One of the things that is going to happen pretty much as soon as he takes office is the beginning of the end of communism. Student revolts in Tiananmen Square are going to be the beginning of kind of this season of democracy. We're going to have the invasion of Panama by the United States in order to overthrow their dictator, General Manuel Noriega, in hopes to create free elections. In the Soviet Union, the old guard hardliners, in a last-ditch effort to preserve communism, are actually going to attempt a military coup in August of 1991. With the support of Moscow's mayor, Boris Yeltsin, who you see pictured here, Gorbachev is going to rally the people against the plotters. However, this is going to be the beginning of the end, and just 4 months later, the Soviet Union is going to disband, and Boris Yeltsin is going to be elected as the very first Russian president. There is going to be a negative impact of this, however, on the United States, because when we stop competing with the Soviet Union, we no longer have a need for all of those defense factories. Most of those are going to be closing down, and thousands of people are going to be out of work. And this severely affects Southern California because this was a huge place for the defense industry. Almost immediately as the Cold War ends, the Persian Gulf War begins. In August of 1990, Iraq's dictator Saddam Hussein sends his army into Kuwait to invade their oil-rich lands. Kuwait's the tiny little country between Saudi Arabia and Iraq on the map there. We were afraid that this was only the first step in Iraq's ultimate goal to capture Saudi Arabia and their vast oil reserves. And so President Bush actually asks the United Nations to create a coalition to combat Saddam Hussein and Iraq. A lot of Americans were not exactly happy with the idea of sending our boys into Kuwait because they were afraid that this was going to be another Vietnam. We were still licking our wounds from that combat and that conflict. And so we were very nervous about this particular one. However, it is not going to be another Vietnam. The main operation of this is Operation Desert Storm. This is going to be a 6-week air bombardment of Iraq by our Air Force. We destroy their bridges and artillery and military targets. And then we launch a ground war that lasts 100 hours. Not 100 days, 100 hours. That is a 4-day ground war. The Iraqi army gives up and they begin retreating. But as they retreat, they actually set fire to over 600 of Kuwait's oil fields, which crippled their economy. Iraq agrees to a ceasefire, but instead of destroying their military and taking Saddam Hussein out of power, we actually allow him to remain in power because we were afraid that if we removed him A religious government, similar to what we would see in Afghanistan or in Iran, would develop, and we didn't really want another religious government in the Middle East. In the election of 1992, the GOP, the Republican Party, is going to nominate Papa Bush for a second term, but he's going to be marred by the high taxes and a growing recession and growing unemployment in the United States. The Democrats are going to nominate Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, and there's going to be a third-party nominee, which is going to be H. Ross Perot, the Texas billionaire businessman who runs as an independent candidate. He won 19% of the popular vote, which was the best showing for a third-party candidate since Teddy Roosevelt ran under the Bull Moose Party in 1912. But Clinton is going to be the winner of this election. He's young, he's energetic, he's charming. He's also going to have a different view on the world because he's the first baby boomer president. And so he grew up in a different time frame than previous presidencies. His idea is to focus on the economy, to lower interest rates, and to reduce the federal deficit by raising taxes on the middle and upper income families, as well as create new taxes on fossil fuels. Democrats are going to win both houses with record levels of minorities, which is going to be creating, as Clinton called it, a government that looks like America. His domestic policies are going to be pretty wide-ranging. You have the Family Medical Leave Act, which allows workers to have 12 weeks of per year of unpaid family leave for either a birth, adoption, or taking care of an ill family member. And this is going to be a great advancement in labor. The other one is AmeriCorps. This program puts students to work improving low-income housing and teaching children to read, cleaning up the environment, very similar to the Job Corps. We also have the creation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is called NAFTA. That is where the United States, Mexico, and Canada decided that they were going to get rid of their tariffs and have free trade amongst the neighbors. Makes sense. The World Trade Organization is also created because we're figuring we're a global economy. We might as well create an organization to help foster this economic trade and system that we're going to be now in. Clinton is also going to be looking to pass, and does pass, a deficit reduction bill, which leads to a budget surplus in the government. That's right, they have actually more money than they know what to do with. And this is going to be great throughout the rest of the 1990s. But he's going to have a lot of other problems that do face him. The first ones are going to be domestic issues. He's going to sign the Brady Bill, which was named for Press Secretary Jim Brady, who had been severely injured in the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. This was a strict gun law that made it a requirement to have federal background checks for gun purchases. However, it is not going to stop domestic violence here in the United States. For example, in Waco, Texas, a religious cult known as the Branch Davidians were suspected of weapons violations. The government goes in to try and issue have a search warrant, and it ends up in a firefight. The FBI gets involved. They lay siege to the compound for over 50 days. And it ends up with the compound engulfed in flames, and it ended up killing 76 men, women, and children. In response to gun control laws and the siege at Waco, Texas, Timothy McVeigh is going to detonate a bomb at the Oklahoma City Federal Building that's going to kill 168 people, including 19 children under the age of 6. Just a few years later, in 1999, there was a high school shooting in Colorado at Columbine High School by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. They killed 12 of their fellow classmates and one teacher and then committed suicide. They had been bullied previously, but their manifesto said that they wanted to create fear and terror in America that would rival the Oklahoma City bombings. The other problems that are going to face Clinton are going to be a little bit more personal. The first is the Whitewater scandal. Clinton was accused of arranging for illegal loans for the Whitewater development, which was a real estate company in Arkansas. and that was during the time that he was still governor of Arkansas. The Attorney General, Janet Reno, decides that we need to have an independent counsel investigate the president rather than the government investigate the president. And so they appoint Kenneth Starr, a former federal judge, to this position. Shortly after this scandal erupts, a new scandal erupts. President Clinton is brought under a civil case where he is accused of sexual harassment for 3 women. And while he's being questioned, he is asked to comment about a relationship with an intern by the name of Monica Lewinsky. And he claims that he had no relationship with her. However, it comes to light that he had committed perjury or lied under oath about this relationship. Kenneth Starr is put in charge of this investigation as well. And he comes out with the Starr report, and this was this huge 400-plus page report where he says that Clinton had obstructed justice, abused his power as the president, and committed perjury. This goes to the House of Representatives, who suggest that we have an impeachment trial. It goes to the Senate for impeachment, and the vote ends up where the president is saved from being found guilty of these crimes by only 5 votes. It's going to be one of the lasting elements of his legacy. Which brings us to the election of 2000. This is a highly contested election, and it's the closest in American history. It's going to be between George W. Bush, or Baby Bush as I call him, and Al Gore, the vice president under Bill Clinton. Al Gore wins the popular vote by a narrow margin, but neither of them had the electoral votes needed to win, and it comes down to the state of Florida. The problem is that the Florida method of voting is really wonky, and they use this punch card system, which was not necessarily very accurate in their trying to reread the ballots. And it was known as a hanging chad, where they weren't sure if they were going to count the ones that weren't totally punched through. And it was a huge question, came so big that it actually ended up at the Supreme Court, who had to basically determine who the president was. And they determined that the hand counts weren't going to count, or the recounts weren't going to count. And the majority winner in Florida was George W. Bush, and thus he would be the next president of the United States. As W takes office, he's going to be looking to increase or continue the economic boom by creating $1.3 trillion in tax cuts. Problem is that most of this is for the wealthy and for corporations, and it takes a lot of the money needed for social programs like Social Security and Medicaid and schools and stuff like this. Speaking of schools, he also creates No Child Left Behind, which you guys are very well aware of, because this is the reason why you guys have the standardized tests every year. These are annual reading and math tests in public schools that are still very highly controversial today. This is going to lead us to September 11th, 2001, and you guys are well familiar with this event. We are going to be attacked at the World Trade Centers and the Pentagon, but the effect of this is going to be longer ranging. We have the creation of the Patriot Act, which allows for extensive phone and email surveillance by the government on suspected terrorists. We also have the creation of a new cabinet position, which is the creation of Homeland Security. We also increase the length of stay for detainees at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, potential terrorists or those that are helping terrorists. We are also going to see the war on terror that is going to be against Osama bin Laden and his extreme terrorist group, Al-Qaeda, as well as the government of Afghanistan, the Taliban, because they were fostering Osama bin Laden. We also have the war in Iraq against Saddam Hussein because we felt or we believed he had weapons of mass destruction. Turns out that he doesn't have any of these, but it did end kind of the war in Iraq that had started previously under Papa Bush. And this pretty much ends our lessons for this year, so congratulations.